My name is Alice, and I'm a 33-year-old sales executive at an e-commerce company in Winona. I have a happy family with my husband Scott, our son Oliver, and my mother-in-law Ruth. I had a happy childhood in Philadelphia, but I got married young at 18 while still in college studying business management. My parents, who loved me very much, were worried about me getting married so early, but I was too in love to think about the consequences. My boyfriend seemed perfect, and we rented a place to live. We worked multiple odd jobs to make ends meet since our families cut us off. We had our first child when I was 19. At first, everything was going well, and we managed our parenting duties just fine. But after Oliver was born, things changed. My husband's father died in a car accident, and his mother had a mental breakdown from the shock, later being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Not being allowed to see his parents deeply affected my husband. I supported him, but he eventually quit his job and started gambling and became abusive. I left him when he hit our 5-year-old son. I started over, got my current job, and decided to take a break from relationships to focus on myself and my son. After a year, my best friend invited me to dinner with her and her fiancé. At the restaurant, a handsome man with warm hazel eyes asked if he could sit next to me. It was Scott. We met again at my friend's wedding but barely spoke. At the end of the evening, Scott told me I looked stunning in my gown. We went for a walk, talked about our careers, hobbies, and families, and eventually started dating and got married. Scott has been a loving father to Oliver, who considers him his real dad. Every year on Oliver's birthday, we visit a new city. Even my mother-in-law Ruth loved Oliver, but things changed when I got pregnant. One day at Walmart, I'd overheard Ruth telling the cashier to check the fruits carefully because her pregnant daughter-in-law, me, shouldn't get sick. When the cashier congratulated her on her first grandchild, Ruth replied, "It will be my first real grandchild. I have a step-grandson who's 10 because my son married my daughter-in-law when he was 5, but I tried to treat him the same." I realized then that Ruth never truly loved my child with all her heart. Ruth also has a granddaughter from her daughter, whom she adores and spoils with gifts. She spends a lot of time with her granddaughter, and anyone who sees them would think Ruth is the best grandmother ever, but only for her daughter's child. One morning, I woke up to the sound of Scott arguing with his mother. Ruth was furious that Scott didn't want to have another biological child. Scott and I had discussed this the night before, and I advised him not to go through with it. Ruth was angry and threatened to end her life if we didn't have another child. Scott assured her we wouldn't make that decision, but she thought I had influenced him. I didn't want a strained relationship with Ruth. She had been kind before, and I didn't know what had caused the change, but I hoped we could win her over with love. I didn't realize that was a big mistake. We were at a farmhouse for Ruth's birthday, and she had already eaten 2 apples but wanted more. Scott refused, and Oliver playfully whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, Grandma." Oliver whispered to his grandma, "I'll sneak an apple for you upstairs." Scott noticed and asked, "What's going on over there?" But my mother-in-law wasn't amused. She said in a stern voice, "Oliver, it's not good to sneak food because of choking. You should never take food without asking an adult." I stepped in and said, "You're right, but he knows it's not okay. He was just joking with you." We laughed, and I added, "Yes, I'm her apple dealer," but she replied sharply, "That's even worse. He shouldn't learn to play favorites." I was heartbroken when I saw Oliver's sad face. He was just trying to bond with his grandmother, who once loved him so much. Scott couldn't take it and said, "Mom, you know how much he loves you, right? He would never do anything to hurt you." She responded, "Yeah, I'm sure you love him very much." One day, I was cuddling with Oliver when she saw us and exclaimed, "Alice, what are you doing? You're pregnant, and you're crushing your belly. It's not good for the baby. Don't do that before your delivery." I wondered if that was really true but decided to stay quiet to avoid any drama. Things got worse on Oliver's 12th birthday. Scott wanted to throw a big party, and we invited many relatives, colleagues, family friends, and all of Oliver's friends. As we were about to cut the cake, my sister-in-law's daughter came crying to my mother-in-law, who was standing next to me. She claimed that Oliver had hit her and pushed her to the ground. My mother-in-law's anger flared up. I could see she was losing control. Before I could calm her down, she went up to Oliver and slapped him without asking what happened. "You've got a lot of nerve, causing trouble on your birthday. Get out of the house," she yelled. Oliver flinched from the slap and ran out of the house crying. I followed him. After some time, I came back and shouted at her, "What are you doing? It's his birthday. At least hear what he has to say." She snapped back, "Stop siding with your son. I've tolerated him enough. He's forgotten where he comes from." Scott, trying to defend Oliver, said, "Mom, do you even know what the fight was about? They argued about you." She told Oliver he's not her real grandson and mocked him until he pushed her. My mother-in-law glared at me. I said, "I don't condone his behavior, but I wonder where she learned this from." My mother-in-law was speechless for a moment, and that's when we finally discovered why she treated her grandchildren differently. She said, "It's normal for me not to feel the same affection for him because he wasn't born for my son. The children of my biological children will always be dearer to me than your son. I'm going to love your baby more. That's just how most grandmothers feel, even if they don't say it." I couldn't believe my ears. It felt like a shocking revelation, leaving us all stunned. I couldn't understand where she got this old-fashioned idea. Who influenced her to think this way? Her reasoning left us speechless. Oliver later told me that his grandma used to tell his sister that his brother or sister would be mommy and daddy's real child. I asked him what else grandma had said, and he told me she kept reminding him that his sister wasn't really his sister. I noticed my mother-in-law looked away with a hint of guilt. Now Oliver believes he's extra special to us because we don't want him to feel less important, even though his younger sibling is going to be grandma's favorite grandchild. I confronted her. "What have you been telling him?" She replied, "I didn't lie. It's the truth, and he needs to realize it." Unfortunately, Scott was away on a business trip when all this happened. The next day, I told him everything. He said, "I'm not surprised at all. She's always been cold towards him, sometimes acting like he doesn't exist." I remember she wouldn't even wish him a simple happy birthday, let alone give him gifts. She never shows any interest in his life, never asks how he's doing in school or about his friends. Scott then tried talking to her. "Mom, what you've done is too much. I've accepted Oliver and am raising him as my own, so what difference does it make?" She replied, "It makes a lot of difference, Scott, and it matters to me. Don't you dare judge me. You can't force me to love your son. That's never going to happen. I don't feel like he's my grandchild, and you'll have to get over it." But Scott was firm. "No, Mom, it's you who'll have to get over not seeing us anymore. We don't need this kind of negativity in our lives, and we definitely don't want our child to experience it. I want you to leave my house right now." Shock and betrayal crossed her face as she stared at her son. Even though I didn't want Scott to live apart from his mother or push her away, I thought it was for the best. We didn't need her in our lives. Being a grandmother to a child who loved her so much was a privilege, and she threw it away by her own choice. Too bad for her. As much as it upset us, we had to make this decision, but she didn't give up. "That's not fair. You can't leave your elderly mother on the streets. I can sue you." Scott replied, "Do whatever you want. You won't see your grandkids anymore. You'll be a bad influence on them." After she said that, I quietly hoped that when she gets older, she wouldn't come crawling back to us for help, because our doors would be closed. If that's how you truly feel about me and my son, then you shouldn't be part of my children's lives. I'll make sure you can't poison their minds anymore. Scott packed her things and she went to stay in Florida. Meanwhile, she kept threatening us over the phone, claiming her rights over the house and her grandchildren. She even bad-mouthed me to relatives, blaming me for separating her from her son. Blinded by rage, Scott and I blocked her on everything after sending a text detailing her actions, which we heard from Oliver and his sister. We made it clear that her behavior was unacceptable and that she wouldn't see her grandkids until they were much older and could understand the world better, so they wouldn't be swayed by her words. We didn't hear from her for a long time after that. One day we got an anonymous call saying my mother-in-law was admitted to the hospital after breaking her pelvis in the bathroom. There was a chance she might never walk again. Scott panicked when he heard this and rushed to be by her side. No matter how good a father Scott was, he was also her son. Though he was angry at his mother for what she did, he couldn't hide the fact that he loved her. "Honey, I think stopping her from seeing the kids is inhumane now. She's old and weak and would want to be with her family in these difficult times. She's just a bit traditional," Scott said, getting emotional. "I met her in the hospital, and she told me that being alone in a hospital bed made her realize how unpredictable life is. She admitted she didn't expect karma to hit her this way. Scott then held my hand and said, "I think we should bring her back home. I don't have the heart to leave her alone at this time, and I can't keep going back and forth to Florida. I hope you understand." I replied, "Of course, honey. It pains me to see her like this. No matter what, she is your mother, and you should be there for her right now. It might be difficult with Oliver, but I'll make sure they get along. I believe she's realized she was wrong." A few days later, she was discharged from the hospital, and we brought her home. Things seemed to be going smoothly, and I thought we were finally back together as a happy family. One day, Oliver was playing around the house when he accidentally slipped and hurt his elbow. A few days later, we were unexpectedly visited by officials from the Social Services Department. They said they had received a complaint that my husband and I were neglecting Oliver because we were excitedly awaiting the arrival of our new baby. They even claimed that the injury on Oliver's elbow was a sign of physical abuse. The officials tried to take Oliver away from us. I was terrified and did everything I could to convince them that the complaint was false, but they wouldn't listen. They took my baby away. I was inconsolable. Scott said, "I wonder who might have given them this false information." My mother-in-law suggested we visit the office and personally convince them to let us keep Oliver. After a lot of effort, we finally got him back and proved that the complaint was malicious. But as we prepared to leave, Oliver softly mumbled to me, "Don't leave me with Dad, Mama. I'm scared of him." This shocked me since Oliver had never said anything like that before. Scott was also surprised and tried to hug Oliver, but he pulled away. One day, when I found Oliver alone, I asked him about it. "Oliver loves his mama, doesn't he?" I asked. "Yes, Mama," he replied. "And he never lies to me, so will he answer honestly?" He nodded. "Why are you scared of Daddy, honey? Did he say something?" "No. But Grandma said that once the baby is here, Daddy will throw me out of the house." I was devastated. We had given her another chance to be part of a happy family, and she had ruined it. I realized she could never truly accept us. I also had a strong suspicion about who might have contacted social services with the false complaint, but I decided to talk to Scott first instead of confronting her. However, fate intervened. Ever since her accident, my mother-in-law had been using a wheelchair. That evening, she was preparing coffee when she accidentally spilled hot water on her leg. She screamed, "Help me, Mother of God," and to my surprise, sprang from her wheelchair and rushed to the kitchen to get some ice. Coincidentally, Scott had just returned from work. We both witnessed her walking, revealing that she had been faking her injury to get back into our home. "Mom, you can walk?" Scott asked, shocked. She froze and slowly turned around. Oh, the impact of the hot water must have helped me walk again. What a miracle. But Scott wasn't convinced. "This is sick, Mom. How could you stoop so low? I idolized you as a child, and this is how you repay me? Just because you despise a little child so much." I had never seen Scott so angry and hurt. "I trusted you and wanted to take care of you after what happened, but this is how you pay me back. Get out of my house now. Please, hear me out," she pleaded. "I did this because I want you to realize we can be a happy family without that child. Your child needs a grandparent. Don't deprive her of that happiness. What will you say when she grows up and finds out she has a grandmother you chose to hide from her?" Scott replied, "I'll take care of that. I'm sure when our child is old enough to understand, they'll see that you being around could do no good." He went to pack her belongings and returned with her luggage. You can't be a good mother if you can convince yourself to do and say such horrible things to a young child, even going so far as to brainwash him. We never saw her again after that. A few months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Scott loved both of his children equally and taught them to always stand by the truth. I often reflected on how I had seen mothers. My mother was a modern, progressive woman despite being from the countryside. She rarely talked about marriage and kids, always pushing me to fulfill my career goals. Unfortunately, I didn't value her ideas back then because I wanted to get married so badly. But life eventually shows you the truth. I learned from my mistakes and from the people I met. Scott and his mother were from the same family but different generations. While I couldn't entirely blame her for her outdated beliefs, I think that if she truly loved Scott, she would have found happiness in his happiness. Her comments and behavior towards my son were unreasonable and unfair. Luckily, Oliver didn't grow up to hate or disrespect her, but he always remembered her as his grandmother. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if she had stayed with us longer and continued her manipulative ways. Fortunately, fate intervened, and we were freed from her toxicity and drama once and for all.